She didn't break when he chose another woman. She didn't break when he paraded that woman through the pack halls like a conquest. She broke the night he handed her a servant's apron and told her to make sure Celine Vale slept comfortably. That's the moment Evelyn Hart understood. Some men don't destroy you with hatred. They destroy you with indifference. Stay with us until the end, because what this woman endures and what she becomes will change everything you think you know about strength. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're watching this story unfold. The apron smelled like lye soap in someone else's kitchen. Evelyn stood in the hallway outside Celine's chamber with it folded over one arm, the fabric rough against her wrist where the mate mark still lived. Faint silver lines pressed into her skin like a scar that refused to fade. 3 years. She had worn that mark for 3 years, had felt it pulse when Kyle was angry, when he was close, when he wanted something from her in the dark hours before dawn. She had believed, the way only fools believe, that the mark meant something permanent. The door at the end of the hall opened. One of Celine's attendants, a girl named Dory with quick eyes and a quicker mouth, leaned out and looked at Evelyn with an expression that lived somewhere between pity and satisfaction. She's asking for the warm compress, her back again. Dory said it the way you announce weather, flat, practiced. Evelyn walked the hall, each step measured. She had learned to walk that way in the last 6 weeks, since the night Kyle had called her into his study and laid out his expectations with the same tone he used to discuss border patrol assignments. Calm, efficient, final. Celine needs consistent care, he'd said. She's carrying my air. That makes her welfare a pack priority. Evelyn had stood across the desk from him and watched his face for something. A flinch, a hesitation. The ghost of the man who used to press his mouth to her temple on cold mornings and breathe her name like it meant something. She found none of it. You want me to serve her, she said. I want you to understand the gravity of this moment for the pack. He hadn't looked up from the map spread across his desk. Your role has always been to support Shadowfang's stability. This is no different. She had not cried. She had learned not to cry in front of him 2 years ago when she'd realized tears only made him uncomfortable and discomfort made him cold. So she had nodded and left, and cried later in the bathing room with the water running loud enough to swallow the sound. Now she pushed open Celine's chamber door. The room was warm. Too warm, a fire burning high in the grate, even though the season hadn't turned yet. Celine Vale reclined against a mountain of embroidered pillows, her dark hair loose across her shoulders, one hand resting on the slight curve of her belly, with the deliberate positioning of a woman who understood that pregnancy was its own kind of theater. She was beautiful. Evelyn had never had the comfort of pretending otherwise. Celine was built for rooms like this. Rich light, soft surfaces, the kind of beauty that made men feel like their desire was taste rather than weakness. She looked at Evelyn the way she always looked at Evelyn, like something found on the bottom of a boot. You're late, Celine said. Dory just told me you needed... I said you're late. Celine reached for the cup on her bedside table and held it out without looking. The tea's gone cold. Get me another. Evelyn took the cup, set down the compress, crossed to the small brazier in the corner where the kettle sat. She kept her face neutral the way a person keeps a wound bandaged. Not because you've forgotten it's there, but because exposure makes it worse. Behind her, Celine spoke to the air. Kyle asked about the room temperature this morning. I told him it was fine. He worries, you know, about every small thing. A pause, timed well. It's sweet, really, the way he checks on me. Evelyn poured water, let the silence be what it was. Does it bother you? Celine asked. That he hasn't visited your chambers in, what is it now, 7 weeks? 8, Evelyn said. She hadn't meant to answer. The word came out before the filter caught it, and she heard Celine's small sound of pleasure at having drawn it. 8. Celine let the number hang. I didn't realize you were keeping count. That's a little sad, isn't it? Evelyn brought her the tea. She set it on the bedside table without a word, picked up the compress, wrung it out in the basin by the window. Her hands were steady. She had worked very hard on steady hands. You should really eat something, Celine said, studying her now with that particular sharpness that women use when they've decided to be honest on behalf of cruelty. You're going gaunt. Kyle notices things like that. He doesn't find it attractive. Evelyn pressed the warm cloth to the small of Celine's back where she'd been directed. The woman shifted, adjusted, made a small sound of relief that she didn't bother making private. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," Celine said, and her voice had dropped into something almost gentle, which was the most dangerous register it ever reached. Not as whatever we are to each other, as a courtesy. She turned her head just enough to look at Evelyn over one shoulder. Kael has already spoken to Elder Voss about the formal restructuring. After the child comes, your position in the pack will be adjusted. He didn't want you to be blindsided. The compress went still against her back. "He told you this," Evelyn said. "We talk about everything. Simple, delivered like a stone dropped in still water. He feels, and I think you know this, Evelyn, I think somewhere you've known it for a long time, that the mate bond has run its course. Circumstances change. Packs evolve. He's going to do right by you financially. Make sure you're placed somewhere appropriate. He's not cruel." Evelyn removed the compress, folded it over the basin edge, straightened. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" Celine looked at her for a moment with something that might have been disappointment at not getting tears. "No, that's all." Evelyn left the room, closed the door without sound. She walked back down the hall, past the wall sconces throwing their shallow orange light, past the portraits of previous alphas staring down from their frames with the particular blankness of painted faces that have never had to answer for anything. She walked past the corridor that branched toward the council chambers, past the staircase that led to the upper rooms where Kael slept, and kept walking until she reached the far end of the east wing where a narrow window overlooked the training yard. She stood there, pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall, felt the mate mark pulse once, faint and steady, like something alive that hadn't yet been told it was dying. Then she pressed her other hand to her abdomen. 6 weeks. She'd known for 6 weeks. She had counted the days the way you count a sentence, knowing the length, dreading the end. She hadn't told anyone, not Mara, who would have panicked and gone straight to the elders, not her cousin Lena, who was kind but had a mouth that couldn't hold a secret past the second cup of wine. And she had not, obviously, told Kael, who was busy building a future with a woman whose pregnancy Evelyn had spent 6 weeks tending to with her own hands. She pressed harder. The life inside her was small still. No movement yet, just a presence she felt in her body the way you feel a held breath. But it was there. It was real. It was the one thing she had not been stripped of. The mate mark pulsed again. She pulled her hand away from the wall and went to her room. Instead, morning came the way mornings came in Shadowfang, without ceremony, without warmth, with the gray pragmatic light of a sky that had work to do. Evelyn was already dressed when the bells rang the first hour. She had not slept well in 6 weeks. Sleep had become something that happened to her in fragments, broken by the nausea that came at 2 a.m. with the reliability of a punishment, and by the particular silence of a room that a man had stopped visiting. She went to the kitchen first. The head cook, a thick-shouldered woman named Brea, glanced at her without comment and nodded toward the prepared tray on the counter. "Her Highness wants soft eggs this morning, and the honey tea, not the ginger." Brea's tone was the flattest kind of contempt, the kind that comes from watching something wrong happen long enough that outrage has become exhaustion. Evelyn took the tray. "You're not eating," Brea said. "I'll eat later." "You've been saying that for 2 weeks." The woman turned back to her stove. "You need to eat, girl, whatever it is you're carrying." Evelyn went still for 1 second, 1 heartbeat. "The tray's heavy is all," she said. "I'm fine." Brea grunted and said nothing more. But the cook's eyes followed her to the door, and Evelyn felt them the whole way down the hall. She was crossing the main hall with the tray when she heard his voice. Kael stood at the far end near the arched entrance to the council corridor, speaking to 2 of his senior wolves, Bryn and Cade, both of them broad and weathered and loyal in the simple, uncomplicated way of men who have never had reason to question where their loyalty points. He had his hands braced on the war table, head bent over something. His voice was low, authoritative, carrying the particular density of a man who has never in his life had to raise it to be obeyed. He looked up as she crossed. For a moment, one moment, the kind that doesn't announce itself and doesn't repeat, his eyes met hers across the hall. She watched his expression do the thing it always did now, register her presence, log it, and return to what mattered. No pause, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of the apron or the tray or the 8 weeks of absence or any of the 1,000 small violences that had accumulated between them into something she no longer had a word for. She kept walking. Evelyn. She stopped, turned. He had straightened from the table. Bryn and Cade both found reasons to examine the floor. A word, Kyle said. She carried the tray to him because putting it down somewhere would have required decisions she didn't have the energy for. She stopped 3 feet away and waited. Up close, he was the same as he had always been. That specific architecture of jaw and brow and the scar along his chin from a border skirmish 2 winters ago. She had cleaned that wound, had held his face between her hands and told him he was going to be fine with a steadiness she'd manufactured out of terror. He had looked at her then like she was the only fixed point in the room. She made herself remember what his face looked like now when it looked at her. The record mattered. How is she? He asked. Her back is bothering her. She slept well. She wanted soft eggs this morning. Good. He nodded, like she'd given him a status report. She mentioned you've been attentive. I appreciate that. The tray was starting to feel heavy. Evelyn said nothing. I need to know you're committed to this, Kyle said. The word choice was so specific it almost deserved admiration. Not loyal. Committed. The language of management. What happens in the next few months sets the foundation for this pack for the next generation. I need my house in order. Your house, she said, is in order. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something older and less specific. The flicker of a man who knows, on some frequency below the conscious, that he is doing something that will cost him. But the knowledge didn't reach his hands or his voice. It never did with Kyle. His certainty was the most complete thing about him. I've spoken to Elder Voss about the formal arrangements going forward, he said. I want you to hear it from me before... Celine told me. His jaw set. I see. Is there anything else? He looked at her for 3 seconds. She counted them, then... That's all. Thank you. She walked away from him and took Celine's breakfast up the stairs and did not let her hands shake on the tray until she was back in the hall outside the chamber door, where she stood against the wall for 30 seconds with her eyes closed and breathed until the shaking stopped. The pack gathering happened 3 days later. It was called an informal assembly, the kind Kyle convened when he wanted the pack to feel consulted without actually being consulted. The main hall was full, wolves packed shoulder to shoulder from the front bench to the back wall, the smell of bodies and pine resin and old wood thick in the air. Torches ran the length of the hall. Evelyn stood near the side column with Dory and 2 other attendants because Celine had decided to make an appearance. Celine appeared. Whatever else she was, the woman understood entrance. She came through the rear doors slowly, one hand at her abdomen, her dark hair pinned up in a way that looked effortless because considerable effort had made it so. A murmur moved through the pack the way wind moves through grass. Not words, just sound. Approval. Recognition. The pack seen its future in the rounded belly of a woman who had spent 2 months carefully performing vulnerability in front of them. Kyle stood at the front. He watched her cross the room, and something in his face, Evelyn watched it happen, did what faces do when a man has decided a woman is his. He couldn't help it. It was the most honest he'd been in months. The assembly was about border reinforcements and the autumn tithe and 2 minor territorial disputes with the Greyclaw pack to the east. Evelyn listened to none of it. She stood by the column and watched the room and thought about exits. She had been thinking about exits for 3 weeks. Not in the catastrophic sense, not yet. Just the inventory of a woman who has learned that the difference between trapped and not trapped is knowing where the doors are. Then Celine swayed. It was small at first, a shift in weight, one hand going to the column nearest her. Evelyn saw it before anyone else because she had been watching Celine the way you watch something you don't trust, with the specific attention of knowledge. She took 2 steps forward. Then Celine's foot caught the edge of the low step near the speaking platform, and she pitched forward. Evelyn caught her. Both hands, tray of water abandoned, body braced, she caught Celine by the arms before the woman's knees touched the floor and held her steady. For one suspended second, it was just the two of them. Celine's weight against Evelyn's arms, the hall going briefly quiet. Evelyn felt the tremble in the woman's body, felt her own heart slamming, felt the instinct to protect override every other feeling she carried. Then Celine straightened, and her eyes, up close and direct for the first time, were not frightened. They were calculating. "Get your hands off me," Celine said, quietly. "Just for Evelyn." Evelyn released her. The hall was moving now. Wolves surging forward, Kael already off the platform, Elder Voss shouting for space. Celine turned toward Kael's approaching figure and her face transformed. Fear arrived on it the way an actor finds an expression, complete and immediate. And she pressed both hands to her belly. "She pushed me," Celine said. Her voice cracked on it, perfectly. "Evelyn pushed me." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the hall had held before. Evelyn stood in the center of it. She could feel every eye in the room like a physical weight. She could feel Kael's gaze from 12 feet away like a hand at her throat. "I caught her," Evelyn said. Her voice came out level. She didn't know how. "She lost her footing on the step. I caught her. You have always resented me." Celine's voice was breaking in exactly the right ways. "You've resented this child. Everything you've done, the coldness, the deliberate neglect. I have done nothing but care for you for 6 weeks. Enough." Kael's voice cut across both of them like a blade. He stood between them. His face was the one she knew the least. Alpha face, the face built for public moments, for decisions that required no visible doubt. He looked at Celine first, then at Evelyn. And she watched him make the calculation she had been afraid of since the moment she caught this woman's weight in her arms. He had already chosen. He had chosen weeks ago. This was just the moment the choice became public. "Evelyn." His voice was quiet, which was worse than loud would have been. "You will leave the hall. You will wait in your chamber. We will address this privately." "Kael, now." She looked at him for 3 seconds. She looked at the assembled pack, at Bryn's uneasy eyes, at Brea near the back wall, watching with clenched jaw, at the rows of wolves who had known her for years and were now watching her be sent from a room like a disobedient child. She looked at Elder Voss, who had already aligned himself with the position of power the way water finds the lowest ground. She left the hall. She sat in her chamber for 1 hour, then 2, then 3. The light changed through the narrow window. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap and listened to the sounds of the pack house resettling, the distant voices, the opening and closing of doors, the footsteps in the corridor that paused outside hers without stopping. When Kael came, it was past the 6th hour. He came alone, which meant he had decided this was a matter to handle quietly. He closed the door behind him and stood near it, as far from her as the room permitted. "Tell me what happened," he said. "I told you what happened. She lost her footing. I caught her." "She says otherwise." "She lies." His jaw tightened. "That is a serious accusation. Everything I've said tonight is true, and you know it, and you are choosing not to know it." She held his gaze. "That is also true." "Evelyn, what will my charge be?" she asked. "In front of the council. What is she saying I did?" He was quiet for a moment. "Endangerment. She's asking the council to what? To formally censure you, restrict your movement within the pack house until after the birth." She breathed. Let the words settle into what they were. "She wants me confined. She wants to feel safe. That is not an unreasonable... Kael." She said his name the way she had not said it in months, without the armor around it, without the careful neutral distance she had trained herself to maintain. She said it raw, and she watched him flinch at the rawness. "Look at me, look at my face, and tell me you believe I tried to harm her." He looked at her. He looked for a long time, and then he said, "What I believe isn't the only consideration." She heard the rest of it without words. What the pack needs, what stability requires, what appearances demand of a man in his position. She had heard these justifications before, had believed for a long time that they were genuine tensions, that he was a man genuinely caught between difficult obligations. She no longer believed that. She saw it for what it was, the oldest cowardice, the choice to let someone else pay the cost of your own comfort. Then do what you're going to do, she said. I'm trying to protect. You are protecting yourself. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of it. You are protecting yourself and calling it policy. And she knows it. And she is counting on it. She stood. The council meets tomorrow? Yes. I'll be there. She walked to the window, put her back to him. You can go. He stood for a moment longer. The mate mark pulsed. She felt it, and she felt him feel it. That tether between them that had outlasted everything else. All the tenderness, all the distance, all the choices that had accumulated into this room. She felt him want to say something. She felt him not say it. The door closed. She pressed her hand to her abdomen. I know, she said softly. To no one. To the small, persistent life inside her that had no knowledge of counsels or censures or the particular way a man's face looks when he has decided you are expendable. I know. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and put things in order. The small gold ring that had been her mother's. The worn map of the Northern Territories she'd kept folded in the bottom of her trunk since the year she'd arrived at Shadowfang as a girl of 16. The packet of dried herbs from Mara's medicine stores that she'd started collecting 2 weeks ago. The ones that travel healers used. The ones that settled nausea and prevented fever and kept a pregnancy from unraveling under the stress of cold and poor food and hard ground. She had been collecting them for 2 weeks. She told herself it was precaution. She told herself she was planning for contingencies the way a sensible person plans. She did not look directly at what she was doing the way you don't look directly at a wound you're deciding whether to cauterize. She put the herbs in a cloth pouch and put the pouch in her coat pocket. Just before the 4th hour, she heard voices in the corridor outside Celine's chamber. Not her corridor, but the one above, close enough to carry through the old stone walls. The pack house was ancient, and ancient walls were poor at keeping sound where it belonged. She heard Celine's voice first, then a man's. Not Kael, but Elder Voss, whose low register she knew from 20 years of council meetings. Until after the birth, Celine was saying, once there's a recognized heir, the formal challenge becomes moot. Any claim she could make, existing bond, Voss said. He won't dissolve it before, he won't have to. A pause. Footsteps. The creak of floorboards. Once I hold his son, the bond becomes ceremonial. Everyone in this pack knows what a political bond looks like. They've watched it for 3 years. And if she makes a scene before then? She won't be here to make a scene. Celine's voice carried something that was almost warmth, the warmth of confidence, of a plan seen through to completion. He's already spoken to the Northern Post. Once the censure passes tomorrow, she'll be assigned oversight duties at the outer settlement. 2 weeks there becomes 4 becomes permanent. By the time the birth happens, she'll be a footnote. Silence. And the Alpha is aware of the arrangement? Voss asked. He will be, Celine said, when it's already done. Evelyn sat on the cold floor of her room with her back against the bed frame, and her knees drawn up and her hand pressed hard against her abdomen. The life inside her pulsed. She sat there until the voices above went quiet, until the house settled back into its nighttime silence, and the only sounds were the wind against the stones and the distant breathing of a pack sleeping in safety inside walls that had protected them for generations. Walls that had never been built to protect her. She got up. Put on her coat, put the pouch of herbs in her pocket, put the map inside the coat against her ribs where it would stay flat and warm. She sat at the small desk in the corner and wrote 3 lines on a scrap of parchment, sealed it, and left it on the desk surface where it would be found, but not immediately. She went to the window, looked out at the dark pack house grounds. The guards on the north wall were on the far rotation. She knew the schedule, had known it for 3 years, had learned it the way you learn everything you might someday need. The east passage through the lower storage would be unwatched for another hour. She put her hand one more time to her abdomen, felt the pulse of it, felt the small, stubborn persistence of a life that had chosen her. Not the Luna, not the servant, but the woman underneath both who was still, despite everything, breathing. "Not here," she said. "Not like this." She opened the door, stepped into the dark corridor, did not look back. She was 3 steps from the east passage when she heard it, a sound from the lower hall that stopped her cold. Not a guard, not routine movement. A voice, urgent and hushed, from the direction of Kael's study. 2 voices, and one of them was saying her name. She pressed herself into the shadow of the stairwell and listened, and what she heard changed the shape of everything she thought she already knew. The voice belonged to Bryn. Evelyn knew it before she could see him. That particular roughness in the lower register, the way he clipped his words like a man who had grown up in a house where talking too long was its own kind of danger. She had known Bryn for 6 years, had trained beside him in the early days when Kael had still believed she needed to know how to defend herself, had sat across from him at 100-pack dinners and watched him be the kind of loyal that doesn't ask questions. She pressed her back into the stairwell shadow and didn't breathe. "Can't be done quietly," Bryn was saying. "If Voss files the censure in the morning and she's moved before she can speak to the Alpha directly, there's no... That's the point." The second voice was Cade. Flat. Certain the way only men who don't carry the consequences of decisions ever sound. "Voss wants it done before she has a chance to contest it. He's already got 3 elders aligned. Once the censure passes, it's council record. The Alpha can't override council record without triggering a formal challenge to his own authority." A pause. Something being set down. A cup. A bottle. "She won't go quietly," Bryn said. "She won't have a choice. Her movement's restricted starting tomorrow morning. Voss is sending the notice at first light." Silence. The specific silence of 2 men who have made their separate peace with something that troubles at least one of them. "She's been Luna for 3 years, Bryn said. "She's been mate," Cade corrected. "There's a difference. Kael never formally installed her, never gave her council standing. Technically, she holds no protected status." Evelyn's hand was against the wall. She could feel the cold stone through her palm, could feel the rough texture of it, the ancient, unmoving reality of it. Her body was doing something she recognized. The particular internal stillness that arrives when panic has been outrun and what's left is just clarity. Not calm, not peace. Clarity, which is the sharp-edged version of both. No protected status. She had lived in this house for 3 years, had carried this mark for 3 years, had been what Kael needed her to be for 3 years. And in the legal architecture of Shadowfang, she was nothing. A mate bond without formal installation was a private arrangement, dissoluble, deniable. Celine had known this. She had known it longer than Evelyn had, which meant someone had told her, which meant this had been planned from a point further back than 6 weeks, further back than Celine's arrival, further back than Evelyn had allowed herself to imagine. She pushed away from the wall, not toward the study, not toward Kael's rooms, toward the east passage. Her mind had been making a decision for weeks. Her body had simply been waiting for her mind to catch up. What? The east passage was a servant's corridor, low-ceilinged and stone-floored, running the length of the house's original foundation. It smelled like cold earth and old timber. Evelyn moved through it by memory. Third door on the left leads to the root cellar. The iron ring pulls stiff. The hinges are silent because she had oiled them herself 3 months ago after noticing they'd started to catch. She had oiled those hinges 3 months ago. She stopped in the dark passage and held that thought. 3 months ago, she'd been standing in this corridor with a pot of oil thinking about maintenance. Or she had been doing something else and calling it maintenance. She couldn't be certain which. She suspected the body knew things the mind took longer to acknowledge. That some part of her had been preparing exits while the rest of her was still trying to believe the house was worth staying in. The root cellar connected to the cold storage. The cold storage had a northern vent, wide enough, that opened onto the lower grounds near the wood stack. From the wood stack to the tree line was 40 yards of open ground. In the dark, with the guards on far rotation, it was 40 yards. She moved. The wood stack was solid and cold and smelled like split pine. She crouched behind it and watched the wall. The guard on the north tower was a wolf named Pell, who she knew was 22 years old and had been on rotation for 4 hours, and whose eyes, at this point in a late-night shift, would be on the tree line to the north and not on the ground below. She knew this because she had watched this watch for 3 years. Not planning, not consciously, just the accumulated knowledge of a woman who had learned to map her world as a matter of survival. 40 yards. She ran them low and quiet, and did not stop until she was inside the tree line, her shoulder against bark, her breath coming in controlled pulls through her nose. She stood there for 30 seconds. No shout from the tower, no bell, nothing but the wind and the packhouse lights burning behind her in the dark. She turned north and walked. The first hour was the worst. Her body wanted to run, which would have been the wrong choice. Running leaves a trail of disrupted ground, of broken branches, of the particular kind of spoor that a tracking wolf reads in daylight like a road sign. Walking was slower and harder on the mind, which kept offering her reasons to turn back. She ignored them. The reasons were real. The cold, the distance, the precariousness of what lived in her body. But none of them changed the math. The math was simple. If she stayed, she would be confined by morning. If she was confined, she could be moved. If she was moved, she disappeared from the board. A woman with no formal status who disappears from a board stops being a problem that anyone with power needs to solve. She was 4 miles into rogue territory before the nausea hit. It came the way it always came, sudden and absolute, a wave that started in the back of her throat and moved forward fast. She stopped, bent, put one hand against a tree and let her body do what it needed to do with the dignity of necessity rather than defeat. When it passed, she straightened, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, kept walking. The map was against her ribs. She hadn't needed to look at it yet. She was heading for Mira's Crossing, a ford on the Ash River that ran through the buffer zone between Shadowfang territory and the unclaimed northern reaches. On the far side of the Ash River, if the old reports were accurate, there were settlements, not pack, healer clans, scattered communities that maintained themselves in the gaps between the major territories. People who did not owe allegiance to any alpha. People who would not report a lone wolf woman showing up cold and pregnant and walking like she had somewhere specific to be. She had thought about this. She had thought about it in fragments, in the spaces between other thoughts. The way you think about a plan you haven't admitted is a plan yet. But it was a plan. It had been a plan. Dawn was 4 hours away. She walked, tapped. She was 2 miles from the river when she heard him. Not footsteps. She hadn't heard footsteps, which meant he'd been running and had stopped before she could mark the sound. What she heard was breath, the specific depth of it, the pattern. She knew it the way she knew the mate mark on her wrist. She stopped. Evelyn. She didn't turn around. How long? Since the wood stack. Kael's voice was controlled, tight, the voice of a man who has been running and doesn't want to show it. I woke when the bond went cold on your end. She turned. He was 20 feet away, dressed for moving fast rather than dressed for the cold. No outer coat, just the dark shirt and the worn leather over it. His hair was loose. He looked like a man who had come out of bed and through the house and across the grounds in the time it takes to stop thinking and start moving. He also looked, she noted with the detached accuracy of a woman who had spent 3 years learning to read him, like a man who did not yet know what he was going to say. You were listening, he said. In the corridor. Yes. Then you know I didn't. You didn't order it, I know. She kept her voice level. The nausea had passed, but her legs were tired and the cold had worked into her shoulders, and she was 6 weeks pregnant and standing in rogue territory in the dark, having this conversation with a man who had sent her notice of her own censure without telling her first. You didn't order it, Kael. You just made it possible. There is a distinction. I'm not sure it matters as much as you'd like it to. His jaw worked. Come back. No. It's dangerous out here. You're in rogue. I know where I am. Evelyn. Sat. He said her name the way he used to say it, with weight, with the particular gravity of a man who isn't used to not being able to fix a thing with presence alone. Come back and we will address this properly. The censure. I can speak to Voss before the morning session. Nothing has been filed yet. And Celine? The pause was a fraction too long. She saw it and filed it. The situation with Celine is, she's not pregnant. Evelyn watched his face. I don't know how I know that. Call it 3 years of watching people's bodies and knowing what different kinds of care look like. and what they don't look like. I don't know how she's made the records say what they say, but I've been tending to that woman for 6 weeks, KL, and what I've been tending to is a performance. She held his gaze. I think on some level you already know that too, and I think that is the thing that is going to eat you alive once I'm gone. The silence that followed was the most honest thing he'd produced in months. He took a step toward her. She didn't move back, but something in her posture changed, a tightening, a stillness. He read it, stopped. What are you not telling me? He said. The question landed exactly where it was aimed. She felt it, felt the weight of what she was carrying, fit. The literal weight, the secret, the 6 weeks of knowing and not saying and deciding, fragment by fragment, that some things you don't give to a man who has demonstrated he can't be trusted to hold them. She said nothing. Evelyn. His voice had dropped. Not the alpha register now, something older. The voice underneath the authority that she had loved first, years ago, before the authority had swallowed everything else. What are you not telling me? Nothing that belongs to you anymore, she said. He moved. Not the slow approach of a man trying to persuade, the fast, full-body movement of a wolf who has just registered something in the air, in the bond, in the particular way she had placed her hand against her abdomen without realizing she was doing it. He closed the distance in 3 strides, and she stepped back once before his hand caught her arm. Not hard, not cruel, but certain. The grip of a man who has understood something and is refusing to let understanding leave the room. Tell me, he said. She looked at his hand on her arm, looked at his face. She had practiced in the weeks of anticipation many versions of this moment. In some versions, she was cold. In some, she was cutting. In none of them had she accounted for how tired she was, how deep the tired went, how it had nothing to do with Miles' walk tonight and everything to do with 3 years of performing stability in a house that had never once offered it back. Let go of my arm, she said. He didn't move. Kael. Quiet. Final. Let go. His hand opened. He stepped back. She watched him understand that he had done something wrong and watch her watch him do it, which was its own particular kind of reckoning. I'm not coming back, she said. Not tonight. Not tomorrow when the censure passes. Not as a servant in a house I was supposed to lead. She pulled her coat tighter. If you want to stop me, you'll have to carry me back. And you and I both know that is a choice you will not be able to make without destroying what's left of what you think you are. He stood in the dark between the trees and said nothing. And she saw it then, what she had been afraid to see, what she had built 3 years of hope against seeing, the moment when a man chooses his idea of himself over the person standing in front of him. He wanted to stop her. She could feel it in the bond like a physical pull, like a hand at her sleeve. But wanting costs nothing. It's the least expensive currency available to men in positions like his. Stopping her would mean admitting she was right, would mean standing in front of his pack and his elders and his carefully maintained future, and saying, I was wrong, I was manipulated, I let the woman who loved me walk out into the cold while I stood and watched. Kael had never once said those words about anything. She turned and walked north. She heard him stand there. She heard him not follow. She heard, at the very edge of her range, the sound of a man slamming his fist into a tree trunk. Once, hard, the violence of a feeling that had nowhere to go, and then nothing. The nothing was worse than the sound. Tekot. She reached the Ash River as the sky turned that particular shade of purple that arrives an hour before dawn, not quite dark anymore, not yet light. The ford was knee-deep and cold enough to make her gasp. She crossed fast, both arms out for balance, the current pulling at her shins. On the far bank, she climbed up onto the root-laced earth and sat for 2 minutes, wringing water from the hem of her coat, breathing. The cold was in her bones now. Her legs had gone to that particular heavy ache that happens on the other side of exhaustion. She made herself stand. 3 miles east, according to the map, there was a settlement marked only as Thornfield on an 8-year-old survey. Whether it still existed was an open question. Whether the people in it would receive her was another. But 3 miles east was a specific direction, and a specific direction was the only thing that mattered now. She had put her hand in her coat pocket to feel the herb pouch, to confirm it was still there, still dry, when she heard the sound behind her. Not Kael. Not wolves from the pack. Something else. The dry crack of a branch under deliberate weight. From the east where she was heading, from the direction that was supposed to be safety. She turned. 3 figures stepped from the tree line. Not wolves. She couldn't smell pack on them, couldn't smell the particular density of a shifted beast. They moved like humans, but with the careful economy of people who had spent years in territory where being seen meant being caught. One of them had a short blade at the hip. The middle one, a woman, was watching Evelyn with eyes that were doing the same calculation Evelyn's were doing, assessing, measuring, deciding. "You're Shadowfang," the woman said. It was not a question. Evelyn was soaking from the knee down, shaking from cold or exhaustion or both, standing on the wrong side of the river with nothing but a coat and a map and 6 weeks of a secret that had made every choice she'd made tonight both necessary and irreversible. "I was," she said. The woman's eyes dropped to Evelyn's midsection. "Back up." "You're running," the woman said. "I'm walking," Evelyn said. "There's a difference." Something moved in the woman's face. Not warmth, something harder than warmth, the expression of a person who has heard this particular music before and knows all the words. She looked at the 2 figures beside her, looked back at Evelyn. "There's a healer 2 miles east," she said. "She doesn't ask questions, but she'll want to know how far along you are before she decides whether she can help you." Evelyn looked at the 3 strangers standing in the dark on the far side of everything she had ever known. She looked at the blade at the first man's hip and at the careful eyes of the woman in the middle and at the sky turning gray above the trees and thought, not for the first time, about what it cost to trust someone and what it cost not to. She thought about what Kael's face had looked like standing in the trees behind her, the choice he'd made, the silence after the slamming of his fist. 2 miles east, she said. 2 miles east. She took a breath, fell into step beside them. She was 3 paces into the trees when she heard the bells, the deep iron bells of Shadowfang, carrying across open water and rogue territory and 2 miles of cold, dark air. The emergency bells, the ones that had not rung in 6 years, the ones that only rang for one reason. She stopped, turned back toward the river, toward the pack house, lights still visible as pinpricks through the dark. Not border bells, not the raid pattern. Something else. Something that rang in a pattern she had to count twice before she recognized it. Death bells. Someone in Shadowfang had died in the night, and somewhere in the ice-cold waterlogged space between her ribs, a fear she had no name for yet took root and began to grow. The woman's name was Cress. She didn't offer it until they were a mile into the trees, moving east at a pace that acknowledged Evelyn's condition without commenting on it. Not slow enough to be patronizing, not fast enough to be cruel. The 2 men flanked without crowding. They had the practiced silence of people who understood that noise in open rogue territory was a choice with consequences. Evelyn walked and listened to the bells fade behind her and tried to place the pattern. Death bells rang in clusters of 3, 1 cluster for a pack elder, 2 for a ranking wolf, 3 for a council member or mate. She had counted. She had made herself count twice, standing at the river's edge with her wet legs going numb because she needed to be certain before she let herself feel anything about it. 3 clusters. 3 clusters meant a mate or council rank. The only council member she had left behind who had reason to be in danger tonight was herself. And she was not dead, which meant someone else had died wearing a title that put them in the 3rd cluster category. And the only other person in Shadowfang who held mate status was Celine Vale, who was not a council member, who was not formally installed, who was, by the same logic that had stripped Evelyn of protection, technically no different in standing than Evelyn had been. Except that Kael had publicly declared her the mother of his heir. That would have been enough for Voss to extend the classification. Voss, who had been in Celine's chamber 3 hours ago discussing timelines and arrangements and the quiet removal of inconvenient women. Evelyn walked and said nothing and let the pieces sit unassembled in her mind because, assembled, they made a shape she wasn't ready to look at directly. "How far along?" Cress said. 6 weeks. A pause. "You walked from Shadowfang." "Yes." "In the cold." Not accusatory, cataloging. Yes. Cress looked at her sideways in the dark. Can you feel it still? Yes. The life in her was quiet but present, that persistent low pulse she had learned to check the way you check a fire in the night. Not every minute, but often enough to know it was still burning. Cress said nothing more. They walked. Decked. The healer's settlement was not what the word settlement implied. It was 3 structures built into the hillside with their backs against the rock face, low-roofed and practical, the kind of architecture that says, we are here but we are not advertising it. A fire burned inside the central building. She could see the light under the door and smell the wood smoke, and under it the particular layered smell of dried plants and rendered fat, and something else, something iron adjacent, that she associated with the place where bodies were regularly repaired. Cress knocked twice. A pause. Once more. The door opened. The woman inside was older than Evelyn had expected. Not elderly, but seasoned in the way of people who have spent their lives doing difficult things without recognition. Her hair was gray at the temples, and her hands, when she held the door, were the hands of someone who worked with them. She looked at Evelyn with eyes that had seen enough arriving in the night situations to have categorized them all. Shadowfang, she said. Former, Evelyn said. Something shifted in the woman's assessment. She stepped back. Come in. Her name was Aldra. She did not waste words or warmth on ceremony, but she was not unkind. She moved with the efficiency of someone who understood that care was a practical act, not a sentimental one. She put Evelyn near the fire, brought water, examined her with the focused attention of a skilled healer, hand steady, questions sparse and specific. You're intact, Aldra said finally. The cold didn't help, but it didn't break anything. She sat back. You need to sleep. You need food before you sleep, but your body won't hold it for another hour, so drink the water first. I need to know what those bells were, Evelyn said. Aldra looked at her. I don't have that information. Someone does. Evelyn looked at Cress, who was leaning against the far wall with her arms crossed, watching with that same calculating steadiness she'd worn since the river. You move through rogue territory between the settlements. You hear things. Sometimes, Cress said. 3 clusters. Death bells. Who? Cress was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, but I can find out by morning. My contact at the border post runs information both directions for the right trade. She paused. What are you willing to offer? Evelyn reached into her coat and removed the gold ring, her mother's ring, small and worn, and the last material thing she'd carried out of her old life. She set it on the table between them. Cress looked at it, looked at Evelyn's face. Sleep first, she said. I'll go. She did not sleep so much as fall into something dark and heavy and without shape. When she surfaced, it was full daylight, gray winter daylight filtering through the oilskin window covering, the fire banked low, the room smelling of broth that someone had left covered on the hearth. She lay still for 30 seconds and let her body report. The cold ache in her legs had settled to a dull throb. The nausea was present but manageable. The small, persistent pulse was there. She pressed her hand to it once, a habit now, a check. There. She sat up, ate the broth. It was plain and slightly too salty, and the best thing she had eaten in 6 weeks. Aldra came in from the back room. Cress is back. Evelyn set down the bowl. Cress came through the door with the cold still on her coat and something in her face that was carefully arranged to show nothing specific. Evelyn had spent 3 years reading careful arrangement. She was on her feet before Cress reached the table. Tell me, Evelyn said. Cress sat, laced her hands together on the table surface. The bells were for Celine Vale. The room didn't change. The fire kept burning. The oilskin window let in its gray light. Evelyn stood and felt the information move through her like cold water. Not shock exactly, but the strange vertiginous sensation of a shape you'd been half seeing in peripheral vision finally turning to face you directly. How? She said. That's where it gets complicated. Cress's voice was measured. The official report, which was delivered to the outer posts at dawn, says natural causes. Pregnancy complications. The child was lost. A pause. The unofficial version, which my contact heard from a guard who was relieved of his post this morning for talking, is that there was a confrontation. In Celine's chamber, in the middle of the night. Evelyn said nothing. The guard said the alpha was heard in that corridor around the 4th hour. Raised voices. One voice, actually. The alpha's. Then quiet. Cress held her gaze. Then bells. The silence in the room was total. Evelyn sat down. Not because she chose to. Her legs made the decision independent of her, and the chair was there to receive it. She sat and looked at the far wall and let herself think the thought she had not permitted herself to think since the river. Kael had gone back. He had stood in the trees and watched her walk away, and then he had gone back. And he had gone to Celine's chamber, and something had happened there that ended in 3 clusters of iron bells and an official report that said natural causes with the smoothness of language that has been prepared in advance. The child, she said. Her voice came out unfamiliar. The report said the child was lost. That's what the report says. There was no child. Evelyn heard herself say it, flat, certain. I told him last night. I told him she wasn't pregnant. Cress was very still. He knew. Evelyn was not speaking to Cress anymore. She was speaking to the shape of what had happened, feeling the edges of it, the dimensions. He went back knowing, and he went to her room and... She stopped. What else does your contact say? That Elder Voss was seen entering the Alpha study before dawn, that the council is in emergency session, that the pack is being told to stay calm, that everything is under control, that the Alpha has the situation in hand. Cress paused. And that there is a search order being prepared, not for a rogue threat. For you. The fire popped. For me, Evelyn said. The official reason being given is welfare concern, that you fled in a disturbed state and the Alpha wants to ensure your safety. Cress's voice carried the precise neutrality of someone delivering information they know will land like a blade. The unofficial reason, which my contact says Voss himself used this morning, is that you are a witness to circumstances that the pack leadership would prefer remain unexamined. There it was. The shape fully turned. Celine was dead. The false pregnancy had died with her, the whole architecture of it, the forged records, the performance, the 6 weeks of theater. And Evelyn, who had said out loud in rogue territory in the dark that she knew Celine wasn't pregnant, who had been heard saying it by the one man who could not allow that knowledge to become public testimony, was now the loose thread that an alpha in a compromised position and an elder with blood on his planning could not leave uncut. She had walked away from the pack to save herself. The pack was now coming after her to finish what she'd walked away from. The thing that lived in her chest in the place where hope used to be did not break. It had already broken. What replaced it was quieter and colder and far more durable. The specific interior shift of a person who has been shown, with complete clarity, that the world she thought she was navigating does not exist, that it never existed, that the woman who believed in the mate bond and tried to earn her place through loyalty and swallowed every indignity in the faith that steadiness would eventually be recognized, that woman had been working from a false map. She looked at her bare wrist, the mate mark, those silver lines that pulsed when Kael was angry, when he was close, when he was lying to himself about what he was. She pressed her thumb against it until the pressure was pain, not because she wanted to hurt herself, because she needed to feel the reality of her own body, the solid physical fact of it, the thing that was hers regardless of what any pack law or alpha decision or elder council said about her standing. How many are in the search party? She said. Cress blinked. My contact said, how many? 6, heading north from the main house. They'll reach the Ash River crossing by midday. Evelyn stood, her legs held, she noted that. Then I have until midday. To do what? Aldra said from the doorway. The healer's voice was even, but her eyes were doing the sharp calculation of someone assessing risk against resource. To not be where they expect me to be. Evelyn picked up her coat from the back of the chair. The crossing is north. If they're coming north, they expect me to have continued north. I need to go east. How far does your territory run? Aldra studied her for a long moment. Outside, somewhere in the trees, a bird started up and went silent again. The fire breathed. There is a clan settlement 12 miles east, Aldra said slowly. Hidden. They've taken in people before, people who needed to disappear and had skills worth feeding. She paused on the last words deliberately, letting them carry the weight of a question. I know medicinal herb preparation, Evelyn said. I can read and write in 3 dialects. I can track, and I can dress a wound, and I can manage a large household supply and labor structure in my sleep. She held the healer's gaze. And I am carrying a child that will need to be born somewhere that isn't a Shadowfang search corridor. Aldra's jaw moved. She looked at Cress. Some communication passed between them that existed below language. 12 miles east, Aldra said again. Cress knows the path. You'll need dry boots. Yours are still damp, and 12 miles in wet leather will cost you more than you can afford to spend right now. She moved toward the back room with the brisk finality of someone who has decided. Give me 10 minutes. Evelyn stood in the center of the room and breathed. Cress was watching her. You're not what I expected, she said, from a Pack Luna. I was never really a Pack Luna, Evelyn said. I was a woman in a house that kept telling her she was. Cress looked at her for a long moment. The ring, she said. I'll get it back from my contact. Keep it. Evelyn pulled her coat on. It was worth the information. She said it the way a person says a thing when they have decided to stop carrying what is no longer useful. Clean, final. Outside, the winter sky sat low and gray over the trees, and 12 miles east was a direction, and a direction was enough. She had learned, was still learning, was learning it in the marrow of every hard mile, that certainty is a luxury, but orientation is a choice. She did not know what the settlement east would look like, did not know if its people would receive her with Aldra's word or turn her away, or something in between. Did not know how the pack search would move, how far Voss's reach extended into rogue territory, how long she had before being found stopped being a possibility and became a certainty. What she knew was that she was on the right side of the Ash River, that the child inside her was still there, that she had walked out of Shadowfang with a code and a map and 6 weeks of a secret that now made her dangerous, and dangerous meant necessary to silence, which meant she was not, as Celine had planned to make her, a footnote. Footnotes don't need silencing. Footnotes are simply forgotten. She was not going to be forgotten. The door opened. Cold air came in. Cress stepped through first and didn't look back, which was the appropriate posture for someone who had been moving through uncertain territory their whole life, and understood that looking back was a habit the territory eventually punished. Evelyn followed. She was 4 steps from the threshold when the sound came. Not bells this time, not the deep iron voice of Shadowfang's towers. A horn. Short, sharp, directional. The kind used for coordinated search sweeps in dense forest. The kind she had heard on pack hunts her whole life. She knew the sound the way she knew her own name. It was closer than midday. It was close now. And it was coming from the north and the west both, which meant they had split the search party at the river rather than crossing together, which meant someone leading this search knew how to think like a woman trying not to be found, which meant Kael was leading it himself. Her hand went to her abdomen. 1 breath. 2. Cress looked back at her from 6 feet ahead on the path, and Evelyn saw in her face the question that didn't need words. Do you run or do you stand? And felt the weight of every version of herself she had ever been compress into this single moment on a frozen path 12 miles from safety, with the man who had made her and broken her and was now hunting her, moving through the trees at her back. She ran. She ran the way animals run when the choice has been made for them. Not with strategy, not with destination, but with the pure consuming mechanics of forward. Cress was ahead on the path and moving fast, her footfalls deliberate on the frozen ground, picking lines through the undergrowth that Evelyn would not have seen on her own. The horn sounded again. West. Closer than west had been 30 seconds ago. Evelyn's lungs burned. 6 weeks of nausea and poor sleep and a night of hard walking had taken something from her reserves that running was now billing her for all at once. She felt it in her thighs, in the back of her throat, in the way her breath was already going ragged in the cold air. But underneath the burn was something else. Something that had nothing to do with endurance training or physical condition. Something older and more fundamental that lived in the body below the level of decision. She was not going to be taken back. The thought was not heroic. It was not even fully formed. It was the way a bone knows it will not bend past a certain angle, not because of will, but because of what it is made of. She had walked out of Shadowfang in the dark with a coat and a map and 6 weeks of a secret. She had crossed a freezing river. She had slept on a borrowed blanket in a stranger's house and eaten plain broth and received the news of a dead woman and a hunting alpha without breaking apart. Each of those things had cost her something. The payment was past. She was running on the interest now, on whatever was left after the principal was gone. Cress hit a fork in the path and turned south without slowing. Evelyn followed. Behind her, the horn again, but this time it was answered, a second horn from the east. The eastern path, the path toward the settlement, the path they had been taking. Cress pulled up short. Evelyn almost ran into her. They stood in the fork with the cold crashing around them and looked at each other with the specific understanding of two people who have just had a door closed in front of them. "They know the settlement," Evelyn said. Cress's jaw was tight. "They shouldn't. That information doesn't... Someone gave it to them." Evelyn was already turning, already scanning the tree line, already doing the inventory of what she had and what she didn't. "Your contact at the border post, the one you paid for information this morning." Cress went very still. "Information runs both directions," Evelyn said. She said it without accusation. Not because it didn't hurt, but because there was no time to spend on the shape of betrayal right now, only on its consequences. "How far south before we hit the river fork?" "Half a mile. But the South Fork is shallower and they'll..." "Half a mile south." Evelyn was already moving. "Then we cross and go southeast into the high ground. The rocky terrain slows a track. That takes us away from any settlement." "I know." Cress held her position for exactly 2 seconds. Then she fell into step. The South Fork of the Ash was shallow enough to cross dry if you picked the stepping stones right, and Cress knew them. She moved across without breaking stride, arms out, her feet finding the flat rocks with the muscle memory of someone who had made this crossing many times. Evelyn followed her line, hit the far bank, kept moving. The ground rose southeast. The trees thinned where the rock came close to the surface, old granite pushing through the frozen soil in long, ridged formations that ran like the spines of buried things. Evelyn's boots, Aldra's boots, dry and solid and 2 sizes close enough, found purchase on the rock edges. She pulled herself up the first rise with both hands, the cold of the stone burning her palms, and looked back down the slope at the tree line below. Movement. 3 figures breaking from the trees at the southern fork crossing, moving fast. One of them had his head down, tracking. And even from this distance, even with the coat in the distance and 3 years of deliberate emotional dismantling between them, she knew the way that body moved. Kael. She turned and climbed. But they gained the high ridge with 400 yards between themselves and the trackers. Cress crouched behind a granite outcropping and breathed hard and looked at Evelyn with eyes that had revised their assessment of the situation twice in the last 10 minutes. "They're not going to stop," Cress said. "I know. We can't outrun them on open ground. The rocks slowed them, but once we descend the east face, we're in flat terrain again, and I'm not running anymore." Evelyn said it quietly. She was looking east along the ridge, where the granite formation ran another 200 yards before dropping away into a natural shelf, a wide, flat exposure of rock with good sight lines in 3 directions, and only one practical approach. She could see it from here, could see what it was. Cress followed her gaze. "That's not a position. That's a box." "It's a conversation," Evelyn said. "One I'm going to have on ground I choose." Cress stared at her. Whatever she saw in Evelyn's face was enough to make her shut her mouth, which was its own kind of answer. "Stay back," Evelyn said. "This part isn't yours." She walked the ridge toward the shelf. Bombed. The shelf was exactly what it looked like from a distance, 40 feet of flat, exposed granite, with the ridge at its back and open air dropping away on 3 sides. The sky above it was low and white, and the wind moved across it steady and cold. She stood in the center of it and felt the exposure of it, the way the wind found every gap in her coat, and thought that there were worse places to stop running. At least she could see clearly in every direction. At least nothing could come at her sideways without being visible. She waited. They came up the approach in 3 minutes. Kyle first. Bryn and 2 wolves she recognized from the Eastern Patrol flanking. They crested the approach and stopped when they saw her standing there, and for a moment the whole ridge went still. Just the wind and the white sky, and 4 people regarding each other across 40 feet of cold rock. Kyle looked like he had looked in the trees the night before, except worse. The careful authority was cracking at the edges in a way she had never seen on him. Not grief. She wasn't ready to call it grief. More like the expression of a man who has been running towards something that keeps moving and has just realized the ground itself has changed under him. He walked toward her. The others stayed at the approach. He walked alone, and she noted it and gave it the weight it was worth, which was something, but not everything. He stopped 10 feet away. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said. "I've been hurting myself for 3 years," she said. "I got good at it." His jaw moved. "Evelyn, Celine is dead." The words sat between them in the cold. He didn't look away. She gave him credit for not looking away. "Yes," he said. "Tell me what happened." "That's not... tell me." Her voice did not rise. It went flat in a way that was more final than volume. "You owe me that. You owe me that at minimum." He was quiet for a long time. The wind moved across the shelf. Below, somewhere in the trees, the 2 wolves from the patrol were still, waiting on his signal. "I went back," he said, "after the river. I went back and I went to her room, and I told her I knew." A pause. "About the records. About the child." His voice had the specific quality of a man saying something he has been carrying since the small hours and has not yet heard out loud. She didn't deny it. She told me the denial would cost more than I wanted to spend, told me what Voss had arranged, told me how long it had been arranged. He stopped. She fell, in the confrontation, the window ledge. Another stop. "I didn't touch her." "But Voss wrote it as natural causes." "Yes. Because if it came out as anything else, the questions would go to places you couldn't afford." "Yes. And those places include the search order on me, which is not about my welfare." She watched him. "Which is about what I know and who I might tell." His hands were at his sides. She had known those hands for 3 years, and she watched them now and saw what they were doing, pressing flat against his thighs, the specific gesture of a man containing himself by force. "I didn't order you hunted," he said. Voss does what serves Voss. He has always done what serves Voss, and you have always permitted it because it served you to have a practical man nearby." She took 2 steps toward him. Not fear. She had burned through fear somewhere on the South Fork crossing. What moved in her now was the clean cold of a woman who has nothing left to protect except the one thing she has not yet said out loud. "I have been complicit in this pack's damage. I have carried its cruelties quietly because I believed that was what love asked of me. I was wrong about what love asks, and I was wrong to let the asking go unanswered for as long as I did." He took a step toward her. "Come back?" "No." She held her ground. "I will not come back to a house where I have no standing. I will not come back to be managed or relocated or quietly disappeared in the interest of pack stability. I will not come back to a man who stood in the trees and watched me walk away and then went back and let his second handle the consequences." She was close enough now to see the exact color of his eyes, which she knew the way she knew every other physical fact about him, that complicated cold gray that went darker when he was angry or ashamed and was darkest right now. "You came out here yourself because the guilt wouldn't let you send someone else. I know that. I know you well enough to know that. But knowing the difference between guilt and character is the work you have not done, Kyle. Guilt comes after. Character comes before." His throat moved. "I'm carrying your child," she said. The wind went through the shelf like something deliberate. His face did something she had never seen it do. Not the careful alpha register, not the managed discomfort she had learned to read, not even the raw want she had seen last night in the trees. Something broke open in it, something that had been sealed too long and cracked under the pressure of those 5 words. And for one unguarded moment, she saw the man underneath all of it, the man she had loved first, The man who had looked at her in a room years ago like she was the only fixed point in it. Evelyn? The horn cut across everything, not the search party's horn. A different horn entirely. Deeper, longer, the kind that moved through chest cavities and didn't stop. From the south, from the direction of Shadowfang's territory. Bryn was already off the approach, moving toward the edge of the ridge with his head up, reading direction. He turned back with a face that had shed every secondary expression and kept only the essential one. "Greyclaw," he said. "Raid formation. They're hitting the southern perimeter." The silence that followed had the weight of a decision in it. Evelyn watched Kyle's face absorb the information the way a foundation absorbs a blow. She watched him feel it, and she watched what it cost him to turn from her toward it, and she watched the alpha come back into his eyes with the cold efficiency of long practice. He looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot take with him and cannot leave behind. "I have to go back," he said. "I know." "This isn't over." "No." She held his gaze. "It isn't." He took one more step toward her, stopped himself. His hand came up. Not to grab, not to hold, just a gesture that went nowhere and died at his side. Then he turned, gave Bryn the signal, moved back down the approach with the 2 patrol wolves at his back, his stride lengthening into the deliberate, controlled speed of a man going to war. Evelyn stood on the shelf and watched him go. Cress appeared at the edge of the approach, came to stand beside her. They both watched the figures disappear down the ridgeline into the trees. "You told him," Cress said. "Yes." "Was that a mistake?" Evelyn looked at the tree line where Kyle had been, looked at the sky to the south where the raid horn had come from, and where now, if she read the smoke beginning to rise at the horizon correctly, something was already burning. "Ask me later," she said. She was already moving before she finished the sentence. Not south, not back toward Shadowfang, and its burning perimeter, and its alpha running headfirst into whatever Greyclaw had brought to his doorstep. East, toward the settlement, toward the 12 miles she had not yet finished walking and the life she had not yet finished building. Her legs ached, her lungs were still raw. The child inside her pulsed steady and absolute. She was 50 yards along the ridge when she heard it, behind her, from the direction of the southern smoke, a sound that was not the raid horn and not the search horn and not any of the sounds that belonged to the established order of things. A scream, then many voices, then a sound she had never heard in 6 years of Shadowfang, the sound of the packhouse bells ringing not in death pattern, but in the broken or rhythmic clanging of a structure on fire. She stopped, turned. The smoke on the horizon was no longer thin. It was black and thick and rising in the particular column that meant something large was feeding it. And at its base, barely visible at this distance, but visible enough, were shapes moving. Not the organized formation of a perimeter defense, but the scattered motion of a pack in collapse. And in the center of the movement, one shape moving against all the others. Back toward the fire. Back toward whatever Greyclaw had put inside the walls. She knew the way that body moved. She stood on the ridge in the cold with the smoke rising to the south and 12 miles of safe ground to the east, and felt the weight of every choice she had made in the last 24 hours, pressing against the weight of one she hadn't made yet. The woman who had walked away from Shadowfang in the dark would keep walking east. The woman who had just told a man on a windswept ridge that she was carrying his child was standing in place watching him run into fire. And the woman underneath both of them, the one who had been here the whole time, the one who had been forged out of 3 years of swallowed indignity and hard miles and the stubborn refusal to stop existing, that woman was already turning around. Not because she forgave him, not because the last 3 years had been undone by 5 words and a cracked open face in the wind, but because something in her that had survived everything else was not going to survive standing on a ridge watching a fire and knowing she had the choice to move. She turned south, her hand pressed once to her abdomen. "Don't worry," she said quietly. She ran. She smelled the smoke before she cleared the tree line. Not wood smoke, the clean, honest smell of a hearth. This was the black chemical smell of a structure burning, of things that were never meant to burn going up anyway, because fire does not recognize intent. It filled the cold air with a thickness that made her eyes water before she even had a line of sight on the packhouse. She came out of the trees at the South Ridge base and stopped. The eastern outbuilding was gone. Just gone. A collapsed skeleton of blackened timber still exhaling heat into the winter air, the stones of its foundation exposed and smoke-stained. The main house still stood, but its eastern face was scorched, 2 windows blown out, the wall above them streaked black. Around the grounds, wolves moved in the organized chaos of an aftermath, some carrying water, some dragging debris, some simply standing with the particular stillness of people whose bodies have outrun their minds. Greyclaw had hit fast and withdrawn. That was their pattern. She knew it from 6 years of border reports, the lightning raid designed not to hold ground but to bleed, to destabilize, to send a message about what a weakened alpha invites. They had hit the eastern stores and pulled back before a full defense could mount. Professional destruction. Nothing personal except the timing. The timing was personal. Someone had told them about Kael's weakened position. Someone had handed them a window. She crossed the grounds and no one stopped her. She was not certain if that meant the search order had been lifted or simply that everyone was too occupied with the fire's aftermath to process her existence. She moved through the organized disorder toward the main house entrance and pushed through the door. The great hall smelled like smoke and sweat and the particular metallic overlay of fresh blood. Wolves with minor burns and lacerations were being tended along the far wall. Bray was there, the cook's broad hands moving with the same efficiency she brought to everything, cutting bandage cloth with the calm of a woman who understood that whatever needed doing now. Brea looked up when Evelyn entered. She held the older woman's gaze for 1 second, then Brea nodded. A single motion, chin down, eyes direct, carrying in its simplicity everything that formal words would have cheapened. Evelyn moved deeper into the house. She found him in the courtyard. Kyle was standing at the eastern wall of the yard, his back to her, looking at what remained of the outbuilding. His coat was gone. The shirt underneath had a burn along the left shoulder, not deep, not life-threatening, but real, the kind of wound that arrives when you've been close enough to the thing to be marked by it. His hands were at his sides, soot-blackened, and he was utterly still in the way of a man who has finished the physical part of something and has arrived at the part where he has to stand in what it left behind. She stopped 10 feet behind him. He said, without turning, "You came back." "Yes. I told Voss to stand down the search order before I left the ridge." Now he turned. He looked at her with eyes that had been running and fighting and burning for the last several hours and still managed to be the most awake she had seen them in years. "I should have done it yesterday. I should have done it the moment he proposed it." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He absorbed that, didn't deflect it. She noted the difference. "How bad is the house?" she said. "Structurally sound. The eastern stores are gone. 2 months of winter supply." Greyclaw knew exactly where to hit. His jaw set. They had internal information. Someone mapped the weak points for them. "Voss," she said. He looked at her. "Voss has been building his exit for longer than you know," she said. Celine wasn't his first arrangement with outside interests. She was just the most recent one. She watched him process it. He needed Shadowfang destabilized enough that an outside alliance would look attractive to the pack. A new alpha elect backed by Greyclaw resources. The false heir was the lever. Establish a successor, remove me, position himself as the power behind the new order. She paused. "I heard enough in that corridor 2 nights ago to give you everything you need to take him in front of the full council." Kael was very still. "You have been holding that," he said, "since the corridor." "I have been holding a great many things," she said. "Some of them were mine to hold. Some of them were yours that I carried because no one else was." The courtyard was quiet around them. Somewhere in the house a child was crying, one of the pack families frightened by the fire. Somewhere further away, the timber of the eastern ruin shifted and settled with a sound like a long exhale. "Evelyn?" He said her name the way he had said it on the ridge, stripped of the alpha register, down to the bones of it. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. Tried again. "What I did to you. What I allowed to be done. I have been standing in this yard for the last hour trying to find words that are adequate, and every version I construct sounds like a man making excuses in formal language, and I don't want to do that." "Then don't," she said. "I chose comfort over truth for 3 years. I chose the appearance of a stable succession over the reality of what I had. I chose—" His voice caught on something. "I chose to believe what was easier to believe. About Celine. About you. About what a man in my position is permitted to feel." He looked at his blackened hands. "That is not something I can apologize for in a sentence and have it mean anything." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He looked up. "Then what do you need from me?" It was the right question. Not what do you want, which carries the softness of desire, but what do you need, which carries the weight of obligation. She had waited 3 years to be asked it in that form. She let the truth of that land in her without bitterness, because bitterness was a luxury she was no longer willing to pay for. "I need Voss removed from this pack before nightfall," she said. "I need the elders who aligned with him to answer for it in open council. Not quietly managed, not relocated, answered for." She held his gaze. "I need the laws that allowed my position to exist without formal standing to be rewritten. I need it done on the record and in front of the pack, not in your study." She paused. "And I need you to understand that none of that is negotiable, and that I am telling you what I need rather than asking you for it, and that the difference matters." He held her gaze through all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Agreed," he said, simply, no qualification. She had prepared herself for argument. The absence of it disoriented her for exactly 1 second, and in that second she felt the tectonic shift of a dynamic that had been operating under its own momentum for years. The long, slow change in who she was and what she was willing to accept, made visible by the fact that a man who had never agreed simply had. Voss was in the council chamber when Kael walked in with Evelyn at his side and Bryn at his back, and the testimony she had given laid out in Kael's voice with the specific precision of a man who has stopped managing information and started using it. The elder read the room in the first 3 seconds and spent the next 30 trying to reconstruct a position that no longer had foundation. He tried 3 different versions of the story. Each one died in the specific silence of a chamber where the alpha was not offering him room to maneuver. By the end of the second hour, with 2 of his aligned elders having broken under separate questioning in separate rooms, and Cade having come forward with a document he'd been sitting on for 6 weeks, Voss was done. Not because Kael was louder or more powerful. He was both of those things, but that wasn't what ended it. It ended because the truth was larger than the structure built to contain it, and structures that don't account for the truth eventually fail under the weight of it. Voss was escorted from the pack house before dark. No bells, no ceremony. He walked out through the eastern courtyard, past the cooling ruins of what his arrangement had burned, and the pack watched him go with the specific silence of people who have revised their understanding of a thing they thought they knew. The formal council session ran until late. Evelyn sat through it. She was exhausted in a way that went past the physical, past the 6 weeks of accumulated depletion, into something deeper. The exhaustion of a person who has been holding a shape for too long and can finally, incrementally, begin to release it. She sat at the council table, not at its edge, but at its center, in the chair that Kael placed for her without comment, and with the deliberate visibility of a public act, and she listened to the council work through the legal restructuring with the careful thoroughness of people who understood they were building something that would outlast this room. Near midnight, when the session finally broke and the chamber emptied, she sat for a moment in the silence. She thought about the woman who had walked out of this house 2 nights ago with a coat and a map and a secret pressed against her ribs. Thought about the river crossing, the cold water, the wet boots, the herb pouch in her pocket. Thought about Aldra's plain broth, and Cress's careful eyes, and the sound of death bells carrying across open water in the dark. Thought about what it had cost to go and what it had cost to come back, and how neither one of those costs was simple or clean or over. She did not have a name for what she was now, not Luna. That title carried the residue of what it had been. Not mate, in the old passive sense of the word, the arrangement without standing, the bond without formal weight, something that had not been named yet in this pack's language because it had not existed in this form before. That was fine. She had learned that names come after, that the thing exists before anyone has the language for it, and that waiting for the language before you inhabit the thing is its own kind of cowardice. The door opened. Kyle stood in it. "The pack is settled," he said. "The families are accounted for. The perimeter is doubled." He paused. "Bryn wants to talk about the Greyclaw response tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" she said. He crossed the room and sat across the table from her. Not at the head of it, not in the Alpha's chair, but across from her the way two people sit when they are talking rather than when one of them is presiding. He looked tired. The burn on his shoulder had been wrapped, the bandage visible at his collar, and there was a cut at his jaw she hadn't noticed in the courtyard. He looked like a man who had been through a fire in every sense available and had come out the other side into the specific exhausted clarity that follows a thing you cannot take back. "I want to talk about what comes next," he said. "So do I," she said. "But not tonight." He nodded, looked at his hands. "She's going to need a name," Evelyn said. He looked up. "The child." She pressed her hand to her abdomen. The small pulse answered her. "I've been thinking of her as she. I don't know why. It could be wrong." She paused. "But she's going to need a name, and I've been thinking about it. And I think names should be chosen by people who understand what they're naming, what it means, what they want it to carry." Cale was very still across the table. "You said she," he said. "I said I don't know." "You said she." Something in his face was open in the way she had seen on the ridge, that cracked open quality that she was beginning to understand was not weakness, but its opposite. The expression of a man who has stopped spending energy on the maintenance of a face and is simply present in the room with another person. "What names have you been thinking?" She looked at him across the council table in the empty chamber with the fire burned low and the pack house settling around them and the winter outside doing what winter does. Pressing at the walls, trying the seams, finding that the structure holds. "Marin," she said, "it means one who endures." He was quiet for a long time. "Marin," he said, "if I'm wrong about the she, we find another name." She held his gaze. "But I don't think I'm wrong." He reached across the table. Not a gesture of possession, not his hand closing over hers, not the Alpha claiming what's his, just his hand, open, palm up, on the table between them. An offer. The kind that can be declined without consequence. The kind that understands the difference. She looked at it. She thought about the woman who had pressed her palm to the cold stone wall of the East Wing corridor 6 weeks ago, and felt the mate mark pulse, and told herself it was already dead. She thought about how wrong she had been about what dead meant, how the thing she'd tried to kill in herself to survive had not died but gone underground, had become something denser and less decorative and far more durable than what it was before. Grief does that. Hard miles do that. The things you carry alone for long enough stop being burdens and become part of your architecture. She was not the woman who had swallowed indignities and called it love. She was not the woman who had believed that endurance was the same as dignity. She had burned those versions of herself somewhere between the wood stack and the river crossing, somewhere in the cold on the far bank, with the death bells carrying over the water, and what had come out of that fire was not softer. It was not softer. But it was, in ways she was still discovering the dimensions of, more free. She placed her hand in his, not as forgiveness. Forgiveness was going to be a long road with difficult terrain, and she was not pretending otherwise. Not as a return to what they'd been, because what they'd been was built on a foundation that had not held, but as a beginning of something that did not yet have a name, something that would be built on different terms by two people who had both, in their separate and costly ways, been dismantled by the last several days and were now sitting across a council table in the wreckage of the old order, with their hands touching and winter pressing at the walls outside. She placed her hand in his and felt the mate mark pulse, not the weak apologetic flutter it had been, but something full and steady, like a thing that has been given room to breathe at last. He closed his fingers around hers, carefully, the way you hold something you have learned the weight of. Outside, dawn was an hour away. The packhouse was quiet. The eastern ruin was cold. In the council chamber where new laws had been written that afternoon, two people sat across a table in the near dark and did not speak, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and what remained did not require language. The fire in the grate breathed. The child inside her, still weeks from being visible, still weeks from being anything the world could point to, pulsed with the steady, unhurried persistence of something that has chosen to exist and will not be argued out of it. And as the first gray light of a winter dawn began to press at the oilskin windows, Evelyn Hart, not the forgotten Luna, not the displaced mate, not the woman the pack had practiced not seeing, sat in the seat she had claimed by right of surviving everything done to remove her from it, and for the first time in 3 years did not check the door to see who was coming. She already knew where she was. She was exactly where she had fought to be. And that, at the end of all things, was enough.